Democratic Congresswoman Maxine Waters of California, who also plans to skip the inauguration. Also joining us is Republican strategist John Brabender. Congresswoman, let me ask you about that. I guess there's two issues here. Is Trump going to be a legitimate president of the United States, actually president of the United States, or not? And are there questions about what role the Russians played in this election? I personally believe they're separate questions, but do you?
No, absolutely not. And I think when John talked about him being illegitimate, he really was talking about the fact that the questions are still out there about whether or not the Russians did play a role in determining what happened in our elections. And also, I think John was talking about there are going to be more investigations to determine whether or not Trump or his advocates, people associated with him on his staff in the campaign, whether or not there was some collusion, whether or not there was exchange of information, whether or not they were strategizing together. And I think that's what he was trying to describe. Other people are trying to talk about this, democracy, and whether or not once you question whether someone is legitimate, that you are questioning whether or not the democracy works. And people, don't want it to be that you are deciding that somehow the electoral system doesn't work, the democracy doesn't work, et cetera. He's really talking about this unusual occurrence where, in fact, we know that the Russians played an important role, and they tried to support Mr. Trump, and they tried to make sure that Hillary Clinton didn't get elected. And so I think that's a legitimate discussion.
Well, let's talk about where that leads to, Congresswoman. You've raised a good point here. I guess for you, it is important. If we find out that somebody on behalf of Donald Trump was on the phone or in email relations with somebody in Russia, or the ambassador to America from Russia, and there was some sort of, as you call it, collusion, then what? Does that make Trump subject to impeachment? What do you mean by not legitimate? Just generally what you mean by the term.
Well, here's
if you
what
find out there was a connection, there was collusion, your term.
Well, here's what I'm trying to get to. If we discover that Donald Trump or his advocates played a role in helping to devise strategy, if they're the ones who came up with crooked Hillary, if they're the ones who came up with she's ill, something's wrong with her energy, and the way that he basically, described her in the campaign, I think that is something that would put the question squarely on the table whether or not he should be impeached.
So you think you can have an impeachable offense before you take office, in other words?
Well, I think that at the point that investigations discover and can confirm and document any of that they had a role in helping to strategize, they had a role in attempting to determine the outcome, that in many ways they used the information that they got from the DNC when they hacked into our emails, et cetera. If that was used against Hillary Clinton in some ways, yes, I think that's impeachable.
Let me respond to that, John. Well, 2 points, what the Russians did and what Trump did. Answer them both ways. If Trump did nothing, but the Russians tried to help him win, then what?
Well, first of all, I feel like I have to respond to say that us Republican consultants are much superior to the Russians in coming up with crooked Hillary. So I don't care about any of that. Here's the
Russian television was running a lot of propaganda that Hillary was mentally and physically impaired. Yeah, that was their the propaganda
because so many Americans are watching Russian television. Let's be honest about this. The only thing that there's an accusation at all is that Russia was able potentially to have hacked into the Democrats and released information that they didn't want voters to actually know. And that is not something that's going to change dramatically the election. We can't say that, there's an illegitimacy to this election because of what they may have done, and we have no idea. Here's the thing. John Lewis is a great American. I would never criticize his character, but he is showing terrible, terrible judgment by saying that he disagrees with this president, and therefore he is literally going to boycott this inaugural because he doesn't believe that he is legally the president of the United States. That is not a principled position. That is a political position.
Well, let me ask the congresswoman, because I think you said already, you accept Donald Trump as the next president, don't you? As legitimate president.
Oh, absolutely. He has won the election according to our electoral system. He's going to be sworn in. But what I do not accept is that we stop investigating what has been a most unusual circumstance in the way that this election was conducted, in the way that he dealt with the other candidates, both in the primary and in the general election. I want to know what Manafort's role was. He worked for and served as the campaign manager. He also had worked at the head of the Ukraine government there. And I want to know what role he played. I want to know what role any of his people played in working
but here we
together.
go again. We're going to investigate Donald Trump based on this. Then we're going to say we got to go back and investigate Hillary Clinton on the emails again.
No, but let me tell you this.
Is it relevant if he did do it? If the Russians did work hand in glove with him?
But here's the
relevant?
point. It depends. If we're on a fishing expedition to try to say what went on here, but the American people hear this and say, this is Washington speak again for politics.
Let me just draw this.
No, not at all. Not at all. Let me just tell you this, and I'll repeat. I do believe that if he wrapped his arms around Putin so tight, and if he is defending Russia and Putin at a time when Putin is killing innocent children and families in Crimea when they took it over, if he is defending him no matter what he does or what he says, and calling on him to further deal with Hillary Clinton's emails. Remember, he told him to hack him. He told him to, and furthermore, let me just say this. You know what Trump also did? He said, if I don't win this election, I'm going to challenge it. That's what he said.
He said
but
kidding
if
at
I
the
win,
end of the speech.
now that I've won, it's okay. So don't try and pretend that he hasn't had a role in some of the things that I'm describing to you. This has been a most unusual and strange and extraordinary experience that we've had.
You know, it is extraordinary, but it's not unique. Let me just tell you, Congresswoman, because I know you remember this, because I'll never forget it. And this is another time where a foreign power got in the way of our politics and screwed with us. Listen to this. When 52 Americans were taken hostage back in late '79, Iran's leadership, the Ayatollahs, held them through Election Day to inflict maximum political damage on then-President Jimmy Carter. Even after Ronald Reagan beat Carter, Iran further delayed the release until Reagan was actually being sworn in as president. At that noontime, to make their point, they released him immediately after Reagan took the oath. Those delays were calculated to make sure Jimmy Carter was punished as much as possible. So we've had foreign governments and foreign people get involved with our elections before, and it's awful.
Well, and I would make the argument
and
that
I was on the plane with Carter when we lost, and I'll tell you, we know why we lost, largely because of the humiliation of the hostage-taking, which was deliberately extended through the election and then right up until the inauguration so that they could say they screwed Carter to the last minute, and they did it.
Yeah, and I think you could make a much better argument that votes were cast because of what was going on with that particular incident.
Well, they're both cases.
I don't think over 60 million Americans voted for Donald Trump.
Congressman, allow me for a second. I want to hit Brabender here with the same kind of tough questioning. If Donald Trump had found out that Hillary Clinton was in bed with the Russians and that they had worked together in the campaign to humiliate him and make a fool out of him, would you think that was corruption?
Well,
Would you think that was corruption?
I would be saying the same thing I'm here now. If you have proof that is infallible proof, then fine.
We know that Russian television was out to screw Hillary. We know their propaganda campaign was out.
But that's not inclusion. That's a completely different argument. I'm sure there were a lot of. You think Mexico didn't have?
Okay, you were the one saying they were using the same language.
Whatever.
You were the one saying they were using the same language.
Well, I'm just saying that there is absolutely no proof that there was any relationship. And frankly, all Trump is saying at this point is, why not have a good relationship with Russia and China and start out that?
Okay, let me talk to the Congresswoman. Generally, go ahead. Your words.
That is not a good argument. This is an argument that Donald Trump has come up with about why not have good relations. I'll tell you, we don't have good relations with Russia. He is saying that he is going to deal with the sanctions that we've put on. He's going to wipe them out because this is his friend. That is unacceptable. Putin, again, is a man that has participated in the killing of innocent families and civilians in Syria. This is a man that is not a friend to the United States of America. And for Trump to come in and disregard all of the intelligence agencies and wrap his arms around Putin now and claim him to be a friend, I don't buy it. I don't think the American people buy it. And he's not going to get away with it. We're going to investigate him and find out what is this real connection that he's got.
You grabbed my attention the other day when you came out of that briefing from James Comey, the FBI director, and I know you can't say exactly what you heard in there. But give us a little sense of what it is. Do you believe that Trump is somehow being held hostage by Vladimir Putin because of information he has on his behavior? Is there anywhere in that world you want to know more about?
I absolutely want to know more about it. And let me tell you why I want to know more about it. You know, what we have heard, not in the classified briefing, but in this information about the dossier that has been collected by the man in London on him, it talks about some things that appears to ring true based on what we have learned about Trump. Remember when he talked about how you could get away with grabbing a woman at her private parts, et cetera, et cetera? He defined himself. We did not define him. And I think we need to know more. We got to dig deeper. We've got to investigate. And yes, I think there may be something that Putin and Russia is holding over his head.
Okay, just to make the point clear, what in that dossier do you think resonates with what we heard Trump say in that bus that day with Billy Bush? What resonates?
Okay, what I have learned or I've heard about the dossier, it's about his involvement with women. It's about possibly prostitutes that are involved in those kinds of things. And he has sounded that way. He's acted that way. And it gives you reason to think maybe something is to this, and we need to find out more.
Yeah, but now we're doing where we have a report that was ridiculed by most credible news sources, and we're saying, let's take something that some person wrote and let's start a major investigation. You or I could write a report tomorrow on anybody, and we're going to start a major investigation because of what we write that has
This is not just anybody. This is not just anybody who did the report.
It was very much criticized by most main news
This is a
streams.
respected intelligence agent that did that report. And so you can't just push it aside, and you can't just say there's nothing to it. Let's find out. Let's do the investigating that's needed to be done to find out whether or not we're putting a man in office, and the most important office in the free world, who may be held hostage by Putin and Russia.
But Congresswoman, this does sound like sour grapes to most Americans.
Okay, you can say that. And Congresswoman, thank you for coming on. And John Brabender, thank you for coming on tonight.